Hello, everyone. This is Perry Carpenter again, and today I'm going to be joined by an old friend and colleague, Michael Leckie. Mike and I met way back in the Gartner days when he was an EXP partner, and those are people that guided and coached CIOs around the world. Provide insight and really a listening therapeutic ear a lot of times as well. Michael went on to become the chief learning officer at the GE Digital Group and is now kind of out on his own doing consulting. He has a consulting group called Silverback Partners and has just written a book that's about to be released called The Heart of Transformation. And I think that really, when I saw that book, I was like, Mike, I've got to get you on and have you talk about that because, as you know, with my book, it was all about transformational security awareness, and we're always talking about the human side of things. So with that, let me bring Michael Leckie on and hear what you have to say for yourself.
All right. Well, thank you. It's a lovely introduction. Yeah, where would you like me to start? I guess I can tell you that, in writing the book, and we've talked about, kind of offline, I'll share some what I think are those human capabilities that the title alludes to that we need in our organizations today. But it came about just, years and years and years of working in the change and culture space and hearing a lot of brilliant, wonderful ideas and thoughts, but not seeing anything practical or applicable. People doing big programs and saying, and we're going to fix the culture too. And it kind of gets thrown off because nobody knows what to do. And so, the capabilities I'll outline, in fact, I've got the list here and I'll tell you more about them, but exploration before execution, learning before knowing, changing before protecting, pathfinding before path following, innovating before replicating, and humanizing before organizing. We talk about those. They're not concepts that I created, but what I try and do in the book is say, look, if you want to change the culture, there's a bit of a formula. And it starts this way. Behaviors drive beliefs, not the other way around. You can't say this is the new truth, the new values, the new vision, and people just change. So you have to start with behaviors, but what behaviors do you change? And I think for me, one of the easiest behaviors to identify and change is the questions you ask. And so each of these has a series of questions, usually about 5, that if asked of yourself, of your team, of others, and answered, does a couple of things. But one of the things that it does, besides maybe give you some answers you didn't expect and learn some things you didn't know, is as you ask some questions you maybe normally wouldn't have asked, you start to get a little bit of what somebody used to call disconfirming information, right? It's like, okay, well, now I asked a question I wouldn't ask, and I got a response I didn't anticipate that doesn't jive with what I assumed to be the case. You do enough of that, and that's when things can start to change in your beliefs. You get enough people changing beliefs accordingly because they're using those behaviors / questions. You get a critical mass, then you change a culture. So that's the idea behind the book.
Yeah, and one of the things I was thinking about this interview last night as I was getting ready for bed, and actually, let me back up and make one thing really crystal for the folks that are watching. You may have picked up on this, but Michael is not in the security space. Michael is in the culture and the digital transformation space, and as I was reading some of the intro materials for the book, Mike, as you said, one of the frustrating things is kind of seeing transformation continue to happen. So people throw themselves at the brick wall, do the thing, feel like they finished, and then there's another one. And if you don't have your people in a growth mindset, kind of preceded for those types of change, you're always going to be hitting that brick wall over and over and over again. People are going to be shocked by the fact that they have to have transformation. And so when I was looking through the premise of the book and everything else, there were 2 things that really stuck out to me that I think you're getting to the heart of. One is moving to a growth mindset from a fixed mindset. And then the other one is constantly combating the Dunning-Kruger effect of, people feeling like they're experts in things just because they have a little bit of knowledge, and then potentially propelling themselves into failure because of that.
I have to write that one down. Dunning-Kruger. I didn't know there's a name for it. So I've learned
Yeah.
something just by coming on. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we hear a concept, we understand it. One of my concerns is then we think we're doing it. So if I'm saying to someone, hey, learning before knowing, what basically saying that, look, and there's been great work done by Ed Hess and other people that you can read, like in his book, Humility is the New Smart, which is great, talks about how knowing what you know has a limited, more and more limited shelf life. And now it's about how fast you can learn something new and continue to learn something new. So you'll tell people that and they'll say, that makes sense. The world's moving faster. Technology is driving things faster. I've got to be a constant learner. And they walk into the next meeting and they go from a perspective of, this is what I know. This is what I know. They're not saying, what about what I think I know might not be true. They're not provoking in themselves, not questioning that. Nobody else is questioning them. They're either saying you're right or you're wrong. And if you say you're wrong to someone, they think, well, I'm actually right, but I'm just going to nod my head because you have more power in the organizational structure, right? So we have that sense of, oh, we've heard it, we understand it, we believe it, now we're doing it. And for me, this was about how do you operationalize those things that allow you to be change ready, change capable. I mean, the ultimate outcome for me when I'm working with client organizations is we want to build the ability to change as a capacity, but it's not an organizational capacity that flicks a switch. It's embedded or built in every single individual and shows up in their interactions with each other. And so it's kind of hard to get to sometimes.
Yeah, so here I think is the parallel between our two disciplines, right? Is when I think about security, we always talk about security awareness, but head knowledge doesn't actually ever drive behaviors in the same way that you say belief doesn't drive behaviors.
Right.
And so I typically talk about knowledge, beliefs, and actions, or knowledge, beliefs, and behaviors.
Yeah.
So you have head knowledge. You might codify that into a belief system, but there's also this other thing that is the behavior, and we're always fighting kind of. If you're familiar with Kahneman's system 1, system 2,
yes,
thinking, which we're always fighting against system 1 because we have this, this limbic system response of just doing things that are either habitual or are the easiest thing to do at the time. It's that mental shortcut that's being taken. So you're talking about dealing with really codifying beliefs and actions within a cultural context. So that means that really this isn't a single person type of thing. This is a collective and a community drive. So how does that work, and how do you support it? Like how do you build the social structures there to make that happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, and I think as you're talking, I wrote down, security awareness. I guess this is sort of like change awareness that I'm trying to drive.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting because the book does focus on individuals, because that's the place to start. But of course, everything we do as individuals is impacted by the group we're in, by the power structures there, by the social aspects of it. I mean, that's just, something we've seen over and over again, starting way back in Kurt Lewin's work where he, detailed that. And so for me, one of the places to do is start with the leaders, which we always talk about, start with the leaders, but I'll tell you what I mean. First of all, I believe that the leaders have to actually change first, not understand, not agree, not align, not buy in, actually change. So they have to do it first. This does two things. It builds their own capacity to be changeable, to have that malleability, that growth mindset, that mental malleability. And second of all, it gives them empathy for how damn hard it is for people to do this. They don't just say, why aren't they on board? Why are they resisting? They get that real empathy and understanding, and they realize that basically they're going to have to build that capability within their organization and their groups and their different departments, one person at a time, and get other people on board. Second of all, leaders have to do what I call leading out loud. So if I'm going to change, generally changing means I've realized something I believe to be true is no longer true, and I understand something else now, and that's okay. I need to share that. People don't need to know what I know. They need to know what I figured out I don't know anymore. They need to know where I'm ignorant. They need to know where I was incorrect. And they need to see that So you create that much vaunted psychological safety, right? So someone can say, you know what? They get it. They've done it. And I'm safe to do it because they're opening up and being vulnerable, leading out loud and telling me how to do it. That's how I approach it. And there's a lot of ways, but I think those are a couple of ways that can be really helpful.
Now that's really cool, because I think that especially within the security space, that vulnerability and speaking about maybe past issues or errors that each of us within kind of security leadership have had is a difficult thing. But what we find is that, of course, stories communicate way better than policy does. And if we talk about a story and the outcome of that, whether we're the hero in that, or whether we actually felt victimized in a certain situation, we put somebody within the emotional context of it, and that can really lead to change in a lot of ways. There was another, as you were talking about all these things related to culture. I remember there was a few years ago a book that I read called Culture Rules, and I don't remember who wrote it. But there's one line that always stands out to me when I think about that book, is you get the culture that you ignore. This kind of goes kind of like to Peter Drucker's quote of what is it? Oh gosh,
it's like everybody gets the results that they're designed for.
That's what it was. I've said it so much I couldn't remember it, called Treat Strategy for Breakfast. But I really like you get the culture that you ignore, because it talks about, I think it gets to the heart of the fact that there's drift that happens if we don't intentionally focus on things.
Well, I think you're so right. I mean, cultures, on the one hand, they're fairly solid, but they can, shift and change over time. And then things can happen that impact the people. When there's a new group that comes in and kind of takes over, it can change. But most of our organizations don't have an ongoing cultural dialogue. There's no of a cultural diatribe. It's like, here's our values, they're on the wall, and we talk about them, right? But I'll never forget the company I worked for that doesn't exist in this configuration anymore. They're now a part of an organization called Resolute Forest Products up in Montreal, Canada. But it was Abitibi Price at the time, and it was very vision and values led. And one of the things we did is we had these 5 clear values, and any meeting you were in, you would hear people saying, so how is that reflecting wise spending? Is this showing the proper level of urgency? And they would dig in, and what they were doing was constantly defining and explaining how the value was manifesting. And what happened is it gave the organization incredible consistency in its decision making in disparate parts of the organization across the globe, because we knew what were the things that aligned with who we were. If we just ignore that, then everybody has their own view of it. And I've literally seen like written values, basically it says, Black is the most important color. Everybody says black is the most important color. Get all the black stuff out of everything. We want everything to be white. They say it, but they don't do anything about it. Look at our politics in this country, right? Everybody on both sides are doing it because they're a patriot. Everybody's a patriot, but they're diametrically opposed views as to what that means.
Yeah. Getting to the heart of cognitive bias is, I think, the key of a lot of that. I was thinking over this past year or several years of the fact that there's if there's one big problem that society still has to face head on, is the acknowledgement of cognitive bias and the damage that causes. Especially with the way that social media and the fast pace of information sharing can create additional polarization based on bias. I could see that playing well or playing out well by that I mean dramatically and drastically, not only within the country, but probably organizations around the world, as well as people try to figure out how to engage each other. So what do you think about within organizations? How do you have meaningful conversation in ways that people can feel like they have the ability to share in genuine and vulnerable ways, but also deal with some of these hard issues, maybe not related to politics, but maybe related to race and diversity and inequity and those kind of things.
Yeah, boy. I mean, a lot of hot button issues that, are hard to discuss because of those cognitive biases that we just
Yeah.
can't see through to each other. But I don't know that I have a great answer for it other than you do just have to start the conversation. And oftentimes I think that means that at the top, leading with what you don't know. I'm working with a company right now. The CEO is someone we both know from our past, I believe, but I'll protect his name here. Not that there's anything wrong, he's done something good. But one of the things is that we were talking about unconscious bias. And he made a comment about someone who was coming in potentially to be hired. And his comment was, I'm not sure if they're quite polished enough for this. It's a person to be out with their very most senior enterprise clients. And it so happens that this person was Black and the other person was white. And so then we said, well, wait a minute. What does polished mean? And is it a white thing? The way polished sits in your mind. We got there and he's like, yeah, it kind of is. It's patterns of speech and that kind of, patois and whatever that's slightly different. But yet everything else led this person to be a great person for the job. And so, just having the conversation and also opening up here to say, what's my blind spot? What am I missing? In fact, one of the questions in the book is, what's my blind spot? And asking people regularly, what's my blind spot? Because somebody can see it. And you don't have to accept it as truth, but you have to be willing to listen and start to explore, because we've all got them. I mean, we don't know our unconscious bias is there because, well, it's unconscious. So we have to find ways to become conscious of it, right?
Yeah. Well, and I like and I remember you talking about this too when we were at Gartner and you were doing some leadership training of sometimes being able to, in a way, step outside of yourself and role play and say, all right, let me say the thing that I was thinking out loud. Because sometimes when we hear that, it changes our perception of it completely. Like in your example with the person you were coaching, when they say their reasoning for believing that person was unpolished out loud and get to the heart of it, all of a sudden they go, wait, that's not really valid. That's, maybe that's something I should rethink a little bit.
If I could say, Perry, what you made me think of, I want to lose it is, my friend Graham Lester from the International Futures Forum has written some great books on change that I think are just wonderful. But he talks about an element of that he calls developing psychological literacy, which means, we're going to stop for a second and then look at our own interpersonal process and how we're doing and what we're doing, and have that ability to stop, examine ourselves and say, are we doing this in as good a way as possible, or could we do it different? And then we get back to it. And so for me, you have to, the stuff isn't about training programs. It's about giving people enough of the tools, like in this case, these simple questions, and then saying, use them in the context of the work you're doing and step back and check out who you are as you're doing it. And when you start to build some skills around that, it becomes a lot easier to step outside yourself and look and see, and also accept others' views from outside yourself that your ego doesn't necessarily want to agree with immediately. So sorry I interrupted you, but I wanted to share
that's fantastic. It prompts a question I'm going to ask in just a minute before we close out. But the thing that I'm thinking about from a security perspective is that so much of this is trying to build a culture where hopefully you can at some point get people to unconsciously act in the ways that you really believe are going to reduce the risk of the organization. And so that means that there's lots of, well, number one, lots of work to be done. But the other thing is figuring out how to carry the culture throughout the organization to unseen areas, and then also how to know where there's cultural gaps. So what are your thoughts on how you ferret out the cultural gaps so that you can address those in the best way possible?
Yeah, I mean, one thought is I think that the cultural dialogue and exploration has to be organization-wide, has to be built into the fabric, and they have to see it role modeled. I mean, I could think of, a few things more powerful than leaders stopping and looking at their own process and correcting and changing things in front of people. I had a CEO I worked for that did that once. It was rare. And, he'd be saying something and someone else would say, "What about?" And he'd be like, "I'm wrong about that. And I just realized why."
Wow.
People are like, "Whoa, we can talk about it." And he was always doing that in alignment with, the values of the organization and asking to be challenged on those. So I think that's, certainly one thing. Another thing is there are some tools out there, but I don't think we have always a great sense of the culture. One of the things that I do with my work is I partner with a technology firm called Learn, Liirn. And Learn is a change acceleration platform. It's really simple, and it's not a commercial for Learn, but I can tell you how it works is that you come up with what are the kind of that, in this case for me, the cultural goal, which is part of the book, this, heart of transformation, if you will, that capability, and say, these kind of 6 things are the pillars of that. What are the drivers? What are the things within that, those kind of question-based things that really are the behaviors that those things look like? And you go out to the organization and say, "Hey, how are we doing with this behavior? Is it here on this end or is it on this end?" And they get a chance to evaluate it. At the same time, you're communicating not just what those values are or the goals are, but the behaviors specifically. Then you're asking people, "Hey, thank you for sharing. Do you have any ideas about how we could improve any of these that you marked we were not doing so good at?" "Great, thank you for that. This has all been anonymous, but do you have an approach, an answer, or want to be part of a group that will contribute to making this better?" And you can raise your hand. And then within that tool, now we've communicated what we're trying to do. We've been clear what the behaviors are. We've gotten some ideas we would have got, and we started to surface hidden talent or energy that we can tap into to help change things. And so that change becomes a company-wide focus. So one of the things I often say is you can't outsource change, whether leaders and people, but leaders especially, like it or not. Their ability to be in a finance role because they're great at finance, or in an HR role because they're great at HR, is secondary to their ability to actually demonstrate, role model, and help their people change. That's just the way of the world, because their knowing doesn't last near long enough anymore.
No, that was super helpful. Thanks. So, and a lot of that aligns with some of the process that I talk about in the culture chapter of my book on transformation. So I've got 2 last questions. Number one is, what's your quick pitch for the book? So what's the heart of the book? What do you want to do? And then the other question after that is, if you had a couple additional books, non-security related ones, which I'm sure you've got a lot of those, if you had a couple additional books to recommend that you think every leader should read, what would those be?
That's a great question. Pitch for the book. I wrote this book, and it says in the dedication, this is for the people you manage. And if you're privileged enough to be in a management role. And so I think that my pitch for the book is, this is not an intellectual exercise. It is stories, it is examples, and it is the behaviors that I want people to read this book. And after they read a couple of chapters, to start putting them into practice immediately and seeing the difference in their life. So I guess at its heart, it's very much about practicality and transformation, not theory. Books I'd recommend, gosh, there's so many, but I referenced one earlier, Humility is the New Smart by Ed Hess and Catherine Ludwig. Brilliant book. I'm talking about the power of humility that I really love. And if there was one more that I'd throw in there, it's very popular already, but it's a great example of how questions can be behaviors. And that's The Coaching Habit, or The Advice Trap, by my friend Michael Bungay-Stanier. I did a tremendous amount of work with it back in the Gartner days, which is really just about how do you put being more curious into action. He talks about, asking, saying less and asking more. And at the heart of the book as well is curiosity. If you can truly embrace curiosity, it changes everything. And so that's a book that helps you figure out how I can get curious quickly.
No, that's great. So both books that I have not read. So, but I do remember his work back from the Gartner days. I think he was doing stuff with Box of Crayons back then.
Yep. Yeah, that's his company.
Mark Bowden as well.
Yep. Yep.
Who's doing a lot of additional work now. I see him all over the place. So so great. Man, it's been great to catch up. Thank you for sharing about the book. Thank you for writing the book, and I'm looking forward to reading it cover to cover as soon as it comes out.
Well, that's kind of you, Perry. Thank you for reaching out as well. It's been just a pleasure to reconnect with you, and thank you for the great questions and giving the opportunity to share. I really appreciate it. You know, it's one of those kind of like a TED Talk. I think that I've got a message worth sharing, and that's really why I wrote the book. Is because, you know, for me, my own personal mission is how can I make the world a better place to live and work? You know, it used to be one organization at a time, and I thought that's kind of limiting. So maybe this will be a part of making it for others. And if just a handful of managers get more curious, get more humble, and really lead change, I think it makes the lives of people in their organizations better. And that's what makes me feel like I'm doing what I should be doing on this earth.
Yeah, absolutely. So that comes out in July. Was it July?
Yep, July 3rd in the UK, Europe, and the rest of the world, and July, I believe, 21st in the US and Canada.
Awesome. Awesome. So looking forward to it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.